This is episode 403 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Todd Butler, Associate Dean and Professor of English in the College of Arts and Sciences at Washington State and author of Literature and Political Intellection in Early Stuart England. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend, Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
Today, we think of Christmas as the season of giving, but in Shakespeare's England, it was New Year's Day that reigned supreme as the best and biggest gift-giving holiday of the entire year. Shakespeare himself alludes to this entrenched tradition in the Merry Wives of Windsor, where Falstaff quips, "I'll have my brains tanged out and buttered and give them to a dog for a New Year's gift." It's a grotesque image, thank you, Falstaff, but it reveals just how deeply the practice of New Year's gift giving permeated society to the point where even dogs might expect a present. Of course, no one in Elizabethan England gave and received gifts quite like the Queen herself, which is why this week we're diving into the fascinating world of New Year's gifts at the court of Elizabeth I, how these gifts were chosen, presented, and meticulously recorded, and how they served as powerful tools for politics, loyalty, and social hierarchy in Shakespeare's lifetime. Joining us to unravel this glittering and strategic tradition is Maria Hayward, whose research on the New Year's gift rolls shines a light on the court culture, textiles, and customs that shaped this extraordinary annual ritual. Our guest this week is Maria Hayward, professor of early modern history at the University of Southampton and an internationally recognized expert on Tudor and Stuart court culture. Maria's research has transformed our understanding of material culture at Elizabeth's court, including the richly detailed New Year's gift rolls, which recorded the annual gifts exchanged between courtiers and the Queen. She's the author of numerous publications on Tudor textiles, royal dress, and court ceremony, and her meticulous work sheds light on how Elizabeth I used the art of gifting to communicate power, loyalty, and political strategy. Today, she joins us to take us inside the high-stakes world of New Year's gifts at the court of Elizabeth I. You can find out more about Maria and links to her work in the show notes for today's episode. Remember, you can follow along with today's conversation with the extra visuals that we're talking about. Log in to the detailed show notes for patrons to see photos of New Year's gift rolls, portraits of Elizabeth I, embroidered gloves, and more. Visit CassidyCash.com/episode 403 and click Access the Detailed Show Notes to either log in using your Patreon credentials, or you can join us as a patron right there. And as a loyal podcast listener, you can access all of these detailed show notes while you listen to the show. Again, that URL is CassidyCash.com/episode 403. And now let's dive into the history. Hello, Maria. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Hello, Cassidy. It's lovely to see you.
Can you walk us through what the New Year's gift rolls actually were? How were they compiled each year, and what kinds of gifts were typically recorded?
So the rolls are, as they sound, a long roll of parchment. As such, that was quite an unusual format of document at the Elizabethan courts. So they were distinctive in their very shape and form, as well as in terms of what they actually record. So the rolls are made up of 4 or 5 pieces of vellum, which are stitched together at the top and the bottom to create the roll. And the information is written on both sides. So in that sense, they're a very clever arrangement. So on one side, you have all the gifts given to the Queen. And on the other side, you have all the gifts that she gave to members of her household and her courtiers. It probably doesn't surprise you that the list is very hierarchical. So it starts with the most important people socially and politically and works its way down to those sort of at the lower end. So those predominantly within the Queen's household. And they finish with a signature or a set of signatures because these are official documents. So, for instance, the 1589 roll was signed by John Astley, who was master of the Jewel House, along with a group of other Jewel House officials and also the royal clerks that actually wrote these rolls up. So you find also there the signatures of Nicholas Bristow, John Pigeon, Stephen Fulwell, and Nicholas Pigeon as well. So that gives you a sense of what the document's like. And if you were reading this as the clerk, you would have to roll it from one end to the other in order to find a particular place in the document. And that's exactly the same if you were reading the document now. So it's a compact format, but it's not necessarily the most reader-friendly format in that sense. In terms of the number of gift exchanges, Elizabeth gave New Year's gifts and received them 45 times during the course of her reign, but we have 24 of the rolls surviving. And they make it possible for us to get a sense of, what she was typically receiving. And in many ways, they might be similar to the sorts of gifts that we might receive now at the sort of the festive period. So money was always popular, as were clothing, both outerwear and more intimate underwear type garments, jewelry, food, books, plate, the occasional animal, and musical instruments. So that gives you a sense of the sorts of things that she was receiving.
Can you describe how the presentation of New Year's gifts actually happened at Elizabeth's court? Was there a formal ceremony where courtiers presented gifts in person, or were they kind of collected and delivered privately? What did the practical process of giving and receiving gifts look like?
So that is a really interesting question. And it's interesting that Elizabeth's choices are different to those of her father. So her father, Henry VIII, he had very much that first option that you described. So he would be standing there within his apartments. The individuals delivering the gifts or their servants would come in and everybody would sort of scrutinize them, their present, and how Henry responded to them. And at that point, we would see one of the members of the royal household taking down the list of who'd brought what, and then they'd be displayed. Elizabeth's process is less formal. And so for her, we don't have this formal delivery as such. Rather, we know that people would have been delivering their gifts to the court during that sort of festive period. Again, either them or a member of their own household. And then they would, again, the details would be noted down, and later, once the list was compiled, Elizabeth would then have a look at the list. And so she could then see what people had given her. And we know from marginal comments that she would particularly ask to see certain things. She would have things left with her rather than being distributed to the various parts of the household. What's interesting is if we look a little bit later, so into James I's reign, process has become really quite commercial. So by that point, we have a description by the Earl of Huntingdon. So he says you would buy your purse, and this would cost you about 5 shillings, and then you would place 20 pieces of new gold. So these would be new gold coins, each worth £1, into the purse. So that means, your gift is costing you £20 and then the 5 shillings for the purse, and that you or your servant would then go into the presence chamber on the New Year's Day at 8 o'clock. In the morning, you would deliver your purse to the Lord Chamberlain. He would note this down. You would then go to the Jewel House where you would receive a ticket. You would then go elsewhere in the Jewel House to collect the amount of plate that you were allocated. So in relation to his £20 gift, he would be getting a gift of 30 ounces of plate. But of course, you have to pay the gentleman who delivers it to you. That would be 40 shillings. And also you give some money to the porter and assorted other individuals. So while you got something in return, you were definitely out of pocket in terms of the balance between what you gave and what you received. And so in that sense, it's an evolving process. And Elizabeth's is sort of in the middle between that very overt presentation in Henry's reign and the very much more commercially managed sort of a situation we find under James I.
What kinds of gifts did Queen Elizabeth receive most often? And what do those choices reveal about the social and political relationships between her and her courtiers? I think I heard you mention animals.
Yes, absolutely. So the occasional gift of, say, a hunting dog, hounds were quite popular. But it's interesting, she doesn't receive as many animals as her father did. So, Henry not only received hounds, but also hawks were quite popular, with the occasional monkey. So we see a decline in sort of animal gifts, interestingly, under Elizabeth. We also, because she reigns for so long, it's also not static, the pattern of what we see. So, for instance, whereas her father received a lot of plate, so gold and silver gilt dishes of all shapes and sizes, Elizabeth never receives that much. And by the 1580s, she receives hardly any at all. She has made her preferences clear, and people now make sure that they give her the things that she would really like, which, not surprisingly, starts with money. Again, it gives you the freedom to buy what you would like. But most people chose to give her either jewelry or clothing. Also, books were very popular, and food. I think food is a traditional festive and New Year's gift, and we see quite a wide variety of food types that she receives. And what's interesting about the choices is, I think, sort of twofold. So you can see a lot of individuals take real care to choose something that sort of should, conjure them to the Queen's mind when she sees it. And I think particularly you see that with the craftsmen and women that give her gifts. So they often give her things that relate to the skills they have. So, her glover, not surprisingly, regularly gave her gloves, and people who created her linens for her gave her that sort of gift. So it showed off their skills to her and would have, highlighted who they were. But individuals who sort of have more money and time, potentially, I think both are important factors. So people like Dudley, for instance, they are going to invest a lot of time and effort in selecting the right gift for the Queen. Although on occasion, he sometimes doesn't quite pitch it right, which is really, really interesting in that sense. But yes, I think the process whereby people selected things and the amount of time and care and attention they placed in finding out what she wanted, what would appeal to her, shows that, getting it right was really important. And this was true across the social spectrum, that it meant that people were able to use their gift to get themselves into the Queen's eye, in essence. And more importantly, if your gift went down well, you would have had the pleasure potentially of seeing her wearing it, or seeing her, engaging with it, or she might discuss it with you. So, they are very important in that sense, in terms of helping to broker and manage those personal relationships.
We know courtiers gave elaborate gifts to Elizabeth for New Year's, but are there records of gifts the Queen herself gave in return? What kinds of gifts did Elizabeth give, and what can they tell us about her relationship or maybe her intentions?
Absolutely. So in that sense, she's much less imaginative, and she very much follows her father's patterns. So the vast majority of people that are listed in the gift rolls receive gifts of gold or silver gilt plate. And so what's important and what distinguishes you from everybody else on the list is how much you get in terms of the weight. In most categories within the rolls, the amount of the weight of the plate is fairly standard. So, for instance, you might see within the sort of leading ladies at court that they would be getting between about 40 to 30 ounces, dependent on their relationship with the Queen and their position in the social hierarchy. But there were certain individuals that really stand out. And perhaps not surprisingly, Robert Dudley is one of those. There is one year where he receives a gilt cup with a cover that weighed 103.25 ounces. But
Wow.
The individual who received the biggest present was Sir Christopher Hatton in one year, where he received 400 ounces. I know, it's spectacular, isn't it? It must have really, stood out and
That's
shown.
fantastic. I wouldn't have thought, I did not expect anyone but Dudley to have gotten the biggest gift. And like, I don't think Christopher Hatton is a name we throw around nearly as much as Dudley. So now I'm really curious what he did that year to warrant such a gift.
Well, I think the thing about, Dudley is that there are periods where he's really, really in favour and periods where he dips out of favour and has to sort of work quite hard to try and get himself back in position. Whereas I think, Sir Christopher Hatton is much more consistent in that role as favourite. And of course, being, eternally single as well. I think that probably helps in terms of, I'm sure she can use him as a means of showing to the others, this is what my ideal favorite looks
my
like.
poster child here. Yes.
Exactly. Whereas, not surprisingly, there are points equally where Essex is looking, riding high, and there are other times when he definitely sort of slumps in the listings. But it's interesting equally that there are a few occasions where she doesn't give plate, and those are really interesting. So, for instance, in 1564, she gives Dudley a carcanet, which is one of those big, heavy collars, which is set with diamonds and rubies, but also a George set with diamonds with a pendant pearl, and 10 dozen buttons set with diamonds and pearls. So here we can see that, she's really showing her favour to him at that sort of relatively early part of the reign. So yes, it's fascinating, the sort of the way in which it's predominantly plate and it's predominantly consistent in terms of the amounts. But there are a few occasions where they things really stand out as being different, and those are really noteworthy.
Maria's research highlights that Elizabeth sometimes refused or even returned certain gifts. Maria, what did it mean when Elizabeth I declined a New Year's gift, and how might that have affected the giver's standing at court?
It was really not something you wanted to happen.
I would think not.
Exactly. In that sense, it's something of a sort of a social and cultural disaster if that happens. So to give you an example of where we have sort of some of these problematic gifts. So I mentioned the Earl of Essex in a previous answer. And in January 1599, we have a letter from Rowland White to Sir Robert Sidney, and he's noting that the Queen is in good health and she's been abroad much over the holidays, and for almost every night she's in the presence chamber to see her ladies dance. And there were some very rich gifts that were given over the festive period. But there is one that's being discussed in terms of, rejected. And this is the discussion of Essex's gift in that year. And as he says, no one's quite sure whose the gift is. It's neither received nor rejected, and it's in the hand of the controller of the household. But everybody thinks it comes from the Paul Earl, the downfall of fortune, it is thought. So that's what people sort of thought in his case. There's an example of a gift that's sort of ignored. This is one that Janet Arnold highlighted with her work when she looked at the wardrobe of the robes. And in 1578, Lady Mary Vere gave Elizabeth a purple taffeta forepart, which was set with roses of white zippers, so a particular type of silk, and it heavily embroidered with Venice gold, and it was unlined and unmade. So in other words, it would be finished so you could make it and personalize it to Elizabeth's size. So it was intended to be made up for the Queen. However, by 1600, it was still languishing in the wardrobe of the robes. And it's thought that the reason why this gift was it was initially sort of accepted and taken into the wardrobe, but then just left, was because very shortly after the New Year, Mary married Peregrine Bertie without the Queen's permission, and also without the approval of his mother, who was the Duchess of Suffolk, or indeed the approval of Mary's brother, the Earl of Oxford. So again, here we can see someone who is, undertakes a rash marriage, and as a consequence, there's a distancing, everybody's distancing themselves from her. And I have one other example. This isn't a New Year's gift, but it again shows you how significant it was if your gift wasn't accepted. And this is a well-known example, but I think it's worth repeating. Elizabeth never formally exchanges New Year's gifts with Mary, Queen of Scots, but we have examples of Mary seeking to send gifts to Elizabeth in 1574, and she uses the French ambassador to sort of broker this for her, and he's found out what colours the Queen would be interested in, and he's bought the fabric for her. And after Mary finishes the embroidery, it's dispatched, but it is not accepted. Now, traditionally, the reason given is because someone in Shrewsbury's house at that point had chicken pox. So you could suggest, oh, well, we're looking after the Queen's health. But, many people felt at the time that, again, receiving that gift could put her in a very difficult position, which is probably why Mary sent it. But it just leaves us with that sense of, it's sort of left in limbo. And again, that shows how Elizabeth could be quite shrewd about, whose gift she accepted, whose she rejected outright, and who she just left and hoped they might sort of fade quietly.
If you enjoy learning about the history of William Shakespeare and you want to go one step further to really experience the history for yourself, then consider joining Experience Shakespeare. This premium tier on Patreon lets you go behind the curtain and get hands-on with your history, trying out games, recipes, and crafts straight from the life of William Shakespeare. All of these activities are ones you can complete at home or in your classroom. And as a special bonus for joining our community of history lovers, you also get access to our exclusive library of virtual tours, animated plays, printable history guides, and special discounts on all the items in That Shakespeare Life shop. If you are ready to go beyond just learning and start experience Shakespeare's history for yourself, then join us today at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife and click on Experience Shakespeare. I'll see you inside. And now back to the show. Textiles, especially richly embroidered fabrics like what you're talking about here, and even gloves and jewelry, they appear frequently in the gift rolls. Why were these items such an important Elizabethan gift-giving faction? I mean, how did they function not just as beautiful gifts, but as tokens of allegiance or maybe even ambition?
Yes, they are all of those things. And I think on the really sort of basic level, they are hugely significant as gifts because they are much more personal than plate. And so, because, they will be worn on the royal body, they will be seen by everybody who, sees the Queen when she's wearing these things. And also Elizabeth loved clothes. So they were, and jewelry. So they were giving her the presents that they knew would give her the most pleasure. And so, and in many cases, people were actively speaking to the key royal suppliers. So the Queen's own tailor, for instance, in order to ensure that they were getting something that was in the height of fashion, colours she liked, designs she liked. And if it was anything that remotely had to fit, obviously you really wanted to make sure that it did. You did not want to send something that was too big or too small. So it's quite a risky gift in that sense, but it's also, if you get it right, something that was very desirable. And one of the things that I think we see increasingly as we progress through Elizabeth's reign, you can see the number of jewels and the amount of clothing going up. It's being given by men and women. I think men have realized that it is probably the gift that she's going to like the most. It's the most personal. So again, as you're saying, if you want to really be brokering that relationship, it's the best one, as long as you get the right thing. It's really important from that point of view. But equally, the Queen is really quite frugal with what she spends on her own clothing purchases. And so the New Year's gifts are really important in boosting her wardrobe to allow her to give that sense of being incredibly well dressed, never wearing the same thing for important occasions, and being able to sort of mix and match all of the components of the garments to create endless variety in terms of outfits. And if she's changing 2 or 3 times a day, it's really important that you have lots of these component parts of the garments. So I think this is why clothing is so important. It's something she really valued and prized. And yes, it was sort of central to that image that she was creating, incredibly opulent.
You've shared with us that Elizabeth was quite political in terms of gifts that she would reject, but I'm wondering how the New Year exchanges helped Elizabeth maintain her authority. How did she manage rivalries among courtiers, especially with all of the turbulent politics that were going on in the late 16th century?
Absolutely. So I think this is one of the real values of the gift giving process, because the vast majority of the members of the sort of the social hierarchy, so her courtiers, but also her household, were engaged in this process. So to be on the list of those individuals receiving a gift from the Queen was really a valuable thing. And so I think she could use her gifts to identify the core within her household, and she does that incredibly well. She also, for instance, makes strategic use of gifts to couples. So she might split a gift between a husband and wife. You see her do that with Cecil, for instance, and his wife. So she can sort of highlight groups and pairings in that way. But also, I think it's that sense of, it ensures that they all have to be focused on her at a particular point of the year, and that is really valuable. I think the New Year's gift exchanges in that sense work for her in a similar way to the way that she uses the Accession Day tournaments towards the end of her reign. So again, this is where, she can ensure that particular individuals can participate in that. Although the downside with the Accession Day tournaments, as we can see with some of Essex examples, is that he can misappropriate them and he can slightly push forward his agenda rather than celebrating her. Whereas I think with the New Year's gifts, the focus is very tightly kept on the Queen. And so it's probably the one time when, all of the leading members of the clergy, all of the leading members of the aristocracy, both male and female, and all of the key members of the household have to focus in on demonstrating their loyalty to the Queen. And I think that's where it becomes particularly useful to her in that sort of, as you say, in the sort of the 1590s, where it's increasingly complex. I think that's really important in terms of how she manages, as you say, the different groupings around her.
Could you share with us an example of particularly memorable or maybe unusual gifts that we can discover recorded in the New Year's rolls?
A memorable example is one that Lord Howard, the Lord Admiral, gave in 1588, which is a sea cap, which is, as it sounds, it's a little piece of headwear with a very nautical theme, which is very appropriate for the date. A sea cap of black velvet embroidered all over with ships and anchors of ragged pearl of sundry sorts, with a flower of agate, with 3 rows of diamonds, 1 ruby in the midst, and in the top 4 diamonds, with a pendant and a roundel with a cross of small diamonds. So here we've got someone who's really stressing their value, their significance in charge of, her navy, and offering her something that, reminds everyone of her connection to the navy at this key point. And I think that is a really nice example of someone who's really chosen something very specific to them. And every time she looks at it, she would think of them. Chosen one given by the Duchess of Somerset in 1576 as something that is a very nice example of the sorts of things that women might give to other women. So this is a little coffer or desk, as it says, with divers tills. So in other words, with little drawers within it, which is covered with crimson velvet. In the top, there's a mirror set in of polished steel. And within the coffer were a collection of useful things, which it describes as combs, toothpicks, scissors, etc., along with a snuzkin, which is a muff of needlework of Venice gold, silver, and silk, lined with unshorn velvet and fringed at both ends, and a sweet bag. So this is one of these little embroidered bags filled with perfume to make all of the things smell delightful. But I think that probably some of the most interesting of the gifts are those that various of the craftsmen and women who work for Elizabeth provide her with. And so John Hemingway, for instance, in 1562, he's one of her apothecaries, and he provides her with a pot of orange conduit or preserve, a box of pine comfits, so sweetmeats made of minced pine nuts, a box of Manus Christi, which translates as the hand of Christ, and was a particular very popular confection at this point made from sugar, rosewater and egg white and flavoured with spices. Whereas Lawrence Schreff, a grocer, he also gave the Queen a sugar loaf, a box of ginger, a box of nutmegs and a pound of cinnamon. I think these give us a lovely insight into the sort of the trade in spices that were coming into the country at this point. Also the sort of popularity and availability of sugar, and of course clear evidence of Elizabeth's love of sweet things, which of course by the end of the reign is going to be causing her such difficulty with her teeth in particular. But yes, these are, I think, sort of what the sorts of things that sort of the sweetmeats are something that is quite a familiar gift, but I think the specific types of gifts are those distinctively unusual and decidedly Tudor or Elizabethan sounding in their form.
Well, as you've mentioned, these roles are long and complex, and there's all kinds of gifts to unpack and explore here. So if we're new to this kind of history and we want to dive in and look into the New Year's gift roles, and particularly the ones for Elizabeth, even further, what are some of your favorite resources you can recommend for us if we're new to this part of history and want to learn more?
Absolutely. So I've sort of identified a couple of things that would be really helpful to start with. I think there is Jane Lawson's book, which is called The Elizabethan New Year's Gift Exchanges 1559 to 1603, which provides transcripts of the extant gift rolls. So if people want to really be reading the details of Elizabeth's gifts, this is where you would find that information and where you can start to look at patterns in terms of gift giving, for instance. But this should be set into context with two sort of older works, one by Collins on Jewels and Plate of Elizabeth I, which was published in 1955, but is an excellent resource looking at how jewellery and plate were made and the context within which the gift-giving context all happens. And the other is Janet Arnold's book, Queen Elizabeth's Wardrobe Unlocked. This is an amazing work on Elizabeth and her clothing, but it also includes two transcripts. One is of a clothing inventory, but another is of Elizabeth's sort of jewels as inventoried in 1600. So again, they're invaluable as providing access to these documents, which aren't always easy for everybody to get to go and see in for real, as it were, but this provides all of the information and they are invaluable, and they're always places that I would start if I was thinking about this sort of topic. But alongside the documents themselves, I really enjoy looking at the objects themselves and thinking about them. And there are some wonderful online collections that I think are really helpful. The collections of the Victoria and Albert Museum, they have a wonderful gallery for the sort of early modern period, which includes examples of many of the sorts of things we've been discussing. So the plate, the jewellery, some of the textiles. Equally, there are some lovely examples in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And of course, the Folger Shakespeare Library has some of these gift rolls in their collection, and they have a very good online digital set of resources. So that is also a place I would definitely look. And if people wanted a broader sort of sense of access to sources, then British History Online, which you can find literally by putting British History Online into your Google search box. I'm sure other search boxes are available. And some of that material is freely available. Some of it is by subscription, but some of it is absolutely freely available. So those are the places I would recommend.
These are great suggestions with so much history to unpack. And I will just reiterate, because I love these online collections they make. It really is a great resource for, especially for someone like me who does not have these royal collections just right down the street. It makes it a wonderful place to explore through artifacts without having to go in person. And they have beautiful photographs there. So we will place direct links to all of these research materials, books, and of course the online collections in the show notes today. So you can go straight to these places and just dive in and start exploring all of the artifacts that are available there. Now, Maria, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
So, yes, I found this one really, really tricky in terms of what I might take. And I was tempted to suggest that the poems of John Donne, but I think I like some more than others. So the thing I would choose is something that isn't a 16th century text. So apologies in advance. I would take the Pepys's Diary. It is vast, voluminous, but an absolutely fascinating insight into his world, which does include gift giving as one of the things that he recounts within there, as well as, all sorts of aspects of his life. It covers sort of essentially a 10-year period, and it is an amazing insight. I'm not sure that I'd necessarily want to take Pepys with me. I think I'd probably rather leave him behind, but his diary is lovely.
It's a great resource. He is someone that we look to pretty frequently here on That Shakespeare Life. He comes up in conversation because he was such a good job at keeping records of so many detailed daily life things. So I think that's an excellent choice. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
At the moment, I have strayed from the 16th century, and I'm actually working on a project with a colleague of mine. We are looking at nightlife in 18th century Hampshire, which does include going to the theatre. And of course, that would include many performances of Shakespeare's plays. They are very popular. So that's what I'm currently working on. But I do hope to get back to do some work on Elizabeth, but that will be a little way off, I think, at the moment, as I have a few other things, again, 17th century things. So the other thing I'm working on is a book on Catherine Braganza.
How fascinating. We appreciate you so much being here to share the history with us about gift giving for Elizabeth's reign. And we look forward to hearing about your future projects and wish you very well with them. Thank you so much, Maria Hayward, for being here today. It's been a fun conversation and we've enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for inviting me.
As we wrap up and put a ribbon on our exploration of New Year's gift giving in Elizabethan England, I'd like to thank Maria Hayward for sharing her expertise on the glittering traditions at the court of Elizabeth I. And since this week is the start of a brand new year, I want to take a moment to say Happy New Year from all of us here at That Shakespeare Life. I am delighted to share Shakespeare's history with you here each week and to get to study alongside our scholars and authors and friends that come to help us dive deeper into the real life and history of our favorite playwright, William Shakespeare. To celebrate, I have a small gift waiting for you. You can go to cassidycash.com/episode 403, and there is a special art print download waiting just for you. While you're there, if you want to dive into the detailed show notes for today's episode and see some of the visual history we have around New Year's Day gift giving, including some images of the New Year gift rolls and some pictures of Elizabeth I and other just special extras, you can log in as a loyal podcast listener to access the detailed show notes for every single episode of That Shakespeare Life, including today's show. If you'd like to go even further into the history of William Shakespeare, our premium membership on Patreon is called Experience Shakespeare. That tier gives you the same access to the insider details, but you also get hands-on activity kits, virtual tours, educator resources, and exclusive discounts on courses and merchandise from That Shakespeare Life. Celebrate the new year by bringing Shakespeare's history right into your home or classroom with all of these extras available right now at cassidycash.com/episode 403. Again, that's cassidycash.com/EP403. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. Until next time, may your gifts be graciously accepted, your fortunes rise like a favored courtier's, and your new year be as bright as Elizabeth's crown. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.